Good morning, everyone. My name is Maya Luria with TMC for Seniors. And today we are going to be talking about a really important topic, the facets of grief and loss after a diagnosis. I would love to introduce my friend Gretchen Steffenson. She is our TMC Spiritual Care Services Manager. How are you today, Gretchen?
I'm doing well. Glad to be here with you.
Good. So I want to just share with everybody a little bit about you. So let me just start by saying that Gretchen is a master of divinity. She is curious about the places where meaning and purpose intersect, and she's been in the field of spiritual well-being for more than 20 years. And she appreciates the opportunity to hear from others about how their life experiences and current understanding of spirituality connect or are formed anew. She believes that curiosity is one of the most important and helpful spiritual tools, and invites others to consider what themes become present or connections can be made when we are ready to discover that. So thank you, Gretchen. I know you've got a lot to share. And if you're watching from home today, please feel free to maybe grab some paper or a pad and a pen in case you have anything that you want to reflect on as Gretchen speaks. And then we will also have time for some questions afterwards. So if you have a question for Gretchen, feel free to put those into the chat and I will ask her afterwards. Gretchen, I'm going to go ahead and put your PowerPoint up for you so that you can get started.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Well, as I said to those in the room, please find an opportunity to help yourself feel comfortable physically as much as possible while we're here in this space together. If you need to take a break from our time together, that's okay. And taking care of yourself, especially in these big topics, is really important. I am glad to be here with all of you, knowing that we have a very large topic in a very small container of time. And so please know that this is really more of an overview and a dip into this topic. And my hope is that you might become curious more about this topic. There are lots of people who have written from many different perspectives, and there are many people who are considered experts, and then there are those of us just sort of stumbling along through this thing called life, trying to figure it out together. And so I invite you to this time and space where we have an opportunity to talk about a really important topic, which is grief and loss. Grief is an emotion that I find is not talked about all that often in general society. I do think that there has been an increase in the last couple years, and for that I am grateful and excited, because I think it gives us an opportunity to break down some of those walls that we can frequently construct, not just around ourselves, but around others as well. And so it gives us an opportunity to consider that. But one of the things that I find very interesting about the word grief is that it frequently comes loaded with lots of other things, stories, ideas, beliefs. And it can be interesting to take a moment to just notice how those words resonate for us. A couple years ago, I had the opportunity to see an art installation in New York. And as my family walked through the top of the museum, I was met with these large canvases with only one word on the canvas. But they were differently constructed, and they were different patterns and different colors and different concepts. And while my family thought, great, we'll take about 5 minutes, run through here, and then we'll keep going, I found myself entranced to be in that space, because each word felt so resonant. Each word for me held a story of a patient or a family or my own story that felt really powerful and profound. And I appreciated the opportunity to see this artist who had taken a moment to consider the art of words. And so in just a moment, I'm going to invite you to that practice of art with words. But first, I'd like to take a moment and invite you to a deep breath. Now, I do this and know that everything I invite you to today is by invitation, not by obligation. There's no pressure. This is really for you and what feels interesting and what you might be curious about. So as you feel comfortable, if you're able, you might want to put both feet on the floor to notice that ground beneath your feet, to perhaps put a hand on your stomach and your heart, and to just take a deep breath in and a longer breath out. And just notice perhaps your feet or your hands, the chair holding you here in this space. Taking a moment to notice where you have been rushing from and allowing yourself to let go of what you might be rushing to after our time together. And when you feel ready, I'll invite you back to this space. And I'm going to invite you to take that pad of paper that you have, and perhaps those of you online have a piece of paper or your favorite note-taking device. I'm going to invite you to just be curious for a moment, as we've taken that deep breath, about what emotions you find coming up for you today. And maybe not all day, maybe just in this moment. And I'm going to invite you to put them on your pad. Now, for some of you, it may look like a list. For some of you, it may become art. For some of you, it may be a different word for each piece of paper because you just need to scratch it out. But take a moment to just notice what feelings, what emotions are showing up for you today. I'm not going to ask you to share, so this will all remain private. Some of you may be waiting why I'm waiting so long. It's amazing how long a minute actually feels when we time it. And as you sit with those words that are on your paper, I'd invite you to consider or to notice how you know those emotions are present. Is it a feeling? Is it a sensation? Is it a thought that's running loops in your mind? How do you know that this emotion is present for you today? And now I'm going to invite you to consider, are those emotions or that one emotion that's showing up loudest for you today, does it feel like a friend or a foe? And maybe it feels neutral, and that can be an interesting idea as well. Come on in, no, please. All right, now I'm going to invite you to allow those words and ideas to sit on your paper. Because I find that when we talk about big topics, our thinking brain tries to jump into the driver's seat and say, I got this. I'm going to think my way through it and around it, and I'm not going to touch it. And so what I would offer is that in allowing ourselves to take a moment to reflect, to take a moment to practice contemplation, that it really gives us an opportunity to set those thoughts aside for a moment. And as one person said, drop out of the confines of logic and practicality. And I would offer, when we are talking about grief and loss, logic and practicality are sometimes not such present friends. So when we talk about grief and loss after diagnosis, I want to offer that it may be important for us to consider resetting our expectations of ourselves just a bit. Because it's a lot of pressure to put on ourselves to assume that we know our emotions before we experience diagnosis, whether it's for ourselves or for someone we care about. That's a lot to think that we are well in tune with our own being. And if you are, that is fabulous. And congratulations on the hard work that you have likely put in to come to that point. But for many of us who are moving on fast forward, that may not be something we're totally in tune with. And that's okay. Because without a diagnosis, emotions themselves can be complicated enough, right? It can be a lot to have those emotions sort of wafting in and wafting out through our days. And I will tell you, in my time in this work, I have met many, and probably myself, who have turned themselves into pretzels trying to avoid the emotions that rise up, that show up, or sometimes overwhelm us. And so what I want to do is take just a moment to attend to how diagnosis may play a factor in our emotional response and experience. I know that many of you are likely familiar with the limbic system and perhaps the threat cascade. There's been a lot of good research, and there's been a lot more talk in society and on news and social media about the threat cascade. And the threat cascade is what happens for us that is biologically hardwired into us when we feel or experience threat, when we perceive threat, whether real or imagined. Our deep hardwiring sets off an opportunity to protect ourselves. And so the image that's frequently used is that of a tiger in the bushes. We hear a rustling in the bushes. We may have thought many hundreds of years ago, is that a tiger in the bush? And our body does what it does best. It works to take care of ourselves. And so it jumps into action. And that limbic system has lots of different responses that we do. And so perhaps maybe you've heard of fight or flight before, a few people. What's fascinating about the limbic system is there's actually 7 different responses. And what research is showing is that we can actually experience more than one response at the same time. And so it may not be fight or flight, it may be fight and flight. And so that can be an interesting thing. And I will leave that research and that topic to the experts who are much more proficient in explaining that than I am. But I think it can be important when we're resetting those expectations of ourselves to be aware that there is a biological part of us that is hardwired to protect ourselves and to navigate what might be a threat. And when we receive diagnosis, for some of us, that is a pretty big threat. That is something that impacts how we know ourselves, how we know someone else, how we experience the world. And so this may not be a simple blip in our road. It may be a giant crater that has changed the face of the road forever. And so it may not be, how do I get over this? It may be, how do I construct a new way through this? And I would offer resetting our expectations for ourselves can be important to do because that's a pretty hefty job. There is a wisdom teacher who writes about a veil. And there is the first half of life and the second half of life. And what is interesting about this veil is that he says what happens to push us through that veil is frequently outside of our control because most of us wouldn't willingly choose to go through that veil. And yet something happens, we find ourselves in this second half of life and we say, what do I do now? How did I get here? I don't want to be here. And yet we can't go back to where we were before. And I would offer that knowledge alone is a lot to sit with. And it is important for ourselves to be patient and to offer ourselves self-compassion and to consider that as a practice so that we can navigate going forward. What I appreciate about his writing on this veil and the first half and second half of life is that it's not about age. And I think our society likes to talk a lot about different parts of life as if it's age associated. I will tell you that having worked pediatrics for the first half of my career, I worked with plenty of kids who found themselves in the second half of life at a very young age. Because those questions come to us when our landscape changes, when we find a different facet, when that experience has shifted even just a bit. We are now looking at a different part of our experience than we knew was possible. What I find about grief is that it is patient. I think it is our most patient emotion. I think it waits and waits and waits until we're ready to attend to it, or for some of us, until it's ready to be attended to. And then I find grief makes its way forward, usually in the least convenient time, in the most uncomfortable way, and in the way that we can no longer hide from ourselves or from the people who are close to us. And I think that's important. Gems through history, from a spiritual perspective and lots of different traditions, have many different origin stories of where they came from and how they were crafted, how we came to be in possession of them. What I think is fascinating about many of the stories and myths that humans have used through the years to help us understand these beautiful but challenging and sometimes unwanted pieces that we come across in the road is that they are frequently, these myths are free, and stories, these folklores, are connected to tears. The tears of one being were wept, whether in joy or in grief, and they became a stone that was picked up and treasured by someone else. And there was a belief that if we cut the gems and the stones in different ways, that it magnified powers that were available. And so while I will offer that I am not here today to say that diagnosis is a beautiful thing, I would offer that how those experiences in our lives get shaped impact how we carry them forward, how they become part of our story long term. And I think that's an important thing to be aware that for thousands of years, we humans have been trying to make sense of experience, of these different cuts and changes, how for one person something can be beautiful, and for someone else it can be a stumbling block in their road. And so how do we offer ourselves an opportunity to step back a bit from what might be very close to our current perspective? So I'm going to invite you again to return to your paper. And I'm going to invite you to consider creating a very brief timeline of grief and loss in your life. You can start at birth, you can end today, or you can let the line continue on. And this I would offer is a project that for many of us can take days, if not months, to work through. And so this is not meant to be an exhaustive list. This is meant to be that opportunity to reflect and to consider what we might consider as a grief or loss in our life. And how we may have defined that historically could be very different than how we define that today. And that's okay. So I'll invite you to just take a moment to consider what those may be. There is a writer who writes about descansos, these small deaths or experiences along the road of our lives that we experience. And I would offer that most of us in our everyday lives may not stop to say, oh, this was a dramatic change in how I see things, in what I believe, in how I make sense of something. And so it can be powerful work to take a moment and reflect. Where were those moments when something changed? It can be interesting when we do these timelines of grief and loss, how many of them begin with the death of a loved one. And yet, as we go through our lives, we might start counting grief in lots of spaces that don't have to do with death at all. The loss of a loved one through relationship, the loss of a job, the dramatic change that we find in ourselves one day when we look in the mirror. And I would offer back to those words we talked about and touched on earlier. Those words change as we change. Those definitions change as we allow them to. And so this work of reflection and contemplation can be important because it gives us a chance to catch up with ourselves, to see how we might define, understand, or engage with those feelings that are showing up, with the sensations that are showing up in our body, with the way that we craft the story that we share with others, as we choose which details to add and which details are still too close that we might not be ready to share. What can be interesting about these lines that we create is that for many of us, we create a straight line. And it can be interesting to notice how much our thinking brain wants us to have a straight line. And yet in my work with people who have experienced profound grief and loss, they tell me it's not a line. It's more of a spiral or some other crazy shape that doesn't quite make sense before that moment in time where their landscape was changed forever. And so I would invite you to consider, what shape might that line be taking for you? A diagnosis doesn't ask us where we are in that line or in that shape. It doesn't ask us if we want it to create a diamond or a circle. It just sort of shows up in the midst of our experience, and we are expected to navigate past it. And this is where I would offer curiosity becomes a really powerful tool. Because when we shift to a curious mindset, we are able to engage with questions, with wonder, with awe. And that is a different sort of mindset. It gives us a chance to consider what has been past, what is present, and where our hope is attached to what may be. And when we get a chance to do that, we shift from this adversarial dynamic with ourselves into one of curiosity. What might I learn or hear or notice differently from this experience that I'm having? Not because it's necessarily a good experience, but because I am getting all kinds of information and input that maybe normally I would have run right by. I like to talk in my work about the thinking mind, the moving body, and the feeling spirit. Because I think all of those parts of us are important. And yet I would offer we frequently don't access them all as if they were important. And there is very powerful work that can be done when we are willing and interested in engaging in that work. And I would offer, and you'll hear me in a little bit talk about it again, that when we find someone who is trained in different modalities and different support ways, it can be interesting to notice how our walk becomes more informative for us. because we tend to shift our focus a little bit and open our lens a little bit wider. I would offer that when diagnosis comes, it is really important for us to give time for the shock and awareness that is happening. In the hospital, we work with our teams to say, if you are providing information, please pause after that information. Because many of the families I have sat with stop hearing at a certain point. And it's okay for us as the receivers of information to say, I need a pause because I'm not listening anymore. I don't hear what you're telling me, and I know it's probably important, and so I'm going to need a moment. And that is one of the power pieces we have, and this is where connection, we'll talk about that in a moment, can be really powerful, because sometimes I may not have my voice to ask for that pause. But if I have someone I'm connected with who's willing to help me speak up and say, we may need a moment here, that can be important. Now, as a chaplain, I'm biased to that, right? Because a lot of times that is our work, is to step in and create a pause, to say, we need a moment. We need a moment, not to get our mind around what's happened, but just to return to our being, to our bodies, to be able to hear more. And so I want to invite you to consider, how long do you give yourself after receiving news, whether challenging news, whether good news, whether changing news? I once worked with a woman who was a widow, and she said, well, my kids keep telling me that they want me to be better. And so how long does this grief thing take? And I said, well, how long were you married? And she said, 70 years. And I said, well, you've been practicing that for 70 years. That's an awfully big expectation to be able to reroute in 6 weeks. But I think, in my experience, that many of us put that expectation on ourselves. That I get this information, I'm supposed to take it in, I'm supposed to make room for it, and I'm supposed to figure out my action plan. And I just want to offer, and maybe I'm the only voice saying it, but I don't think I am, it's okay to take a moment. It's okay to say we need a little bit of time. Because it gives us an opportunity maybe to just reconnect with where our body is in space and time. And that is important because that helps get some of our tools and resources back online. If we are loving someone, caring for someone who is meaningful to us, has received a diagnosis, it's important for us to check our time clock of expectation with their time clock of expectation. Because I would offer they are frequently very different. I tell the patients I work with in the hospital, if you are in a gown and you are not in your own skivvies, you are the one who drives the information. Because it is a lot to be outside our control. Now I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. The illusion of control. And so if we find ourselves in that gown and someone comes to be our support, it's important for us to check in and make sure that we have at least some understanding of where the other person is. It's one of the things I find fascinating about words, especially in the English language, is we'll use the same words over and over again, but we rarely check in with each other to say, are we using the same definition? Do I understand that word the way you understand that word? And that can be a powerful check. I would invite you to consider how your emotions are showing up and how they may be offered to the person who is experiencing diagnosis, I'm sure with well-intention, and yet perhaps may not be landing in the way that you mean them to. And it is important for those of us who are grieving to be able to, again, step into that space, if we're able, and say, that's not how I'm making sense of this right now. That's not what my meaning looks like. And if we are someone who loves that person who is experiencing diagnosis and making sense of what's next, it's important for us to say, I want to offer this, and it's okay if you don't choose to receive it. Because then we are aware that we are not the person in the gown. We are not the person who is revamping that specific landscape. And it gives us a chance to return to ourselves, to notice that it is our landscape we are responsible for noticing. It is our facets that we become familiar with. What does this mean for our understanding of self? What does this mean for our understanding of autonomy, of engagement, of relationship? What does this mean? Knowing that we craft our own meaning, but we are not in charge of crafting anyone else's. And where I would offer that there may be some power in that is that when we shed the skin of supposed to, we may find a little more freedom outside here to talk about the things that are really important for us to talk about. Those things that perhaps have been shelved until another time. And it can be interesting how when we begin to talk about those things that are important and meaningful to us, we find connection in new and different way. When we start to notice where light and shadow interplay with each other, how the light gets cast in new and different ways, it gives us a chance to consider what needs to be said and perhaps what no longer needs to be said. It gives us a chance to engage with what are we bringing from ourselves and what are we receiving from others. Now, I told you I spent a long time in pediatrics, and so I have a love of children's stories. And I do find that I frequently get more out of children's stories than I do out of many other educational materials. But one of my favorite stories is that of stone soup. Is everyone familiar with stone soup? It is a wonderful story, and it appears in many different traditions, in many different forms. But what's powerful about stone soup is that it shares a story about a small village. And 3 strangers come to the village, and they notice that all of the townspeople have their windows shut tight and their doors shut tight, though they might be peeking just a little bit to see who these 3 visitors are. And the visitors say, there must be much pain and grief in this place. And so they begin to talk amongst themselves about need to create stone soup, for they are weary from their journey. And it is a small child who comes to them and says, what are you doing? And that moment of curiosity begins. Because that child runs and says, let me be curious about what's here. Not because it's good or bad, but because I wonder. And that the 3 visitors say to the child, we need a big pot. If you could bring us a big pot, that would be great, because we're going to make stone soup. And we'll also need 3 stones. The child says, my mom has a big pot. I'm going to run and get it, and I'll be right back. So they bring the pot. The child brings the pot to the visitors, and the visitors create a fire and fill it with water. And they put in the 3 stones. And then soon others become curious. And they bring their pieces that they might offer to this soup. One brings carrots, one brings onions. One brings a bit of meat. And soon this pot of soup is bubbling and smelling so wonderful, and the townspeople are out amongst this pot for the first time in ages. And they are recognizing the faces of their neighbors, and they are noticing one another. Now, this pot is not necessarily filled with all the good or best things. It is filled with the things that we have. And what I appreciate about ancient wisdom and the stories that get passed by humans through the ages is that it is that permission and that reminder that I don't always need to bring my best things, that I might just bring what I have. And if I am navigating a new landscape after diagnosis, I may have some bitterness to bring. I may have some pain. I may have struggle, fear. I may have many things that I would be worried to bring to this collective. And yet, I notice that when I bring these things, someone else may also be bringing joy. Someone also may be bringing hope. More importantly, someone also may be bringing understanding. And now I'm not in the place of my own experience. I am here and I have a bridge to the experience of others. And that, I would offer, is one of our gifts of humanity. So I'm going to invite you to return to your paper. I'm going to invite you to consider what you might bring to this pot of soup if we were making it here today. And if you are online joining us, what ingredients would you ship to us that we might add to this place? And once you've considered what you might bring, I'm going to invite you to switch to a different piece of paper. I'm going to invite you to consider what resources you have available to you currently. And the reason I invite you to this is because when we are in the midst of struggle or challenge, it can be a hard time to build a list of what skills and resources we might have. And so knowing that we have come and we have offered these things to the pot of soup, as we stand around this pot, what resources might be available to you? What friends might show up in ways that they help you carry your ingredients to this pot? What medical teams might be helping with data and information and plans? What practices do you participate already? Maybe those of a spiritual practice, maybe those of a general way of being, of well-being. Do you go for a walk? Do you brush your teeth? Do you notice the birds or the mountains? Which practices do you use? Perhaps it's art. This is a list that I hope you will continue to add to. This is not a permanent piece of paper. This is a growing, living list. And so if there are things that come to mind later today, I hope you'll find this piece of paper and add to it. And if you are like me and love sticky notes, you might consider putting a few around. My family teases me about all the different places they run into sticky notes. The reason I offer that these lists can be important reminders is that in my experience, nobody gets more coping skills than they practice. It's one thing I find interesting about humans is we have this expectation that if something changes our landscape irrevocably, that we will be naturally imbued with all the talents and gifts and skills and resources that we need. And yet, I will offer, I haven't quite seen that happen yet, but I'm always open to being surprised. Reminding ourselves the resources we have gives us a very practical space to return to if we need it. The other reason I want you to think of these as living lists, as changing and changeable, is because what works for us in the past may not work for us now. And that doesn't mean that it's not a good tool, resource, relationship. It just means that we have changed. And so it can be interesting to invite ourselves into these moments of contemplation to see how we are changing. Because every day, we are someone new. Who you woke up as today is different than who you were yesterday because you went to bed with a whole bunch of new information. Whether it was about the temperature, whether it was about how you brushed your teeth. Maybe it was a dream that showed up and informed you in a new and different way because that feeling body and that moving spirit had time to speak a little bit of information that our thinking brain during the day tries to push out. What can we help ourselves be open to when our world has gotten a little small? These can be important questions to be curious about. One of the things that I think is important to know is that there are many different modalities these days to help us navigate grief and loss. And I am a big fan of therapy. I think it is a powerful tool because having someone who is not part of our friends' family or our everyday is important. And when I talk about therapy, I talk about the importance of having a good mechanic on staff. For many of us, we drive our cars over and over again, but we stop for an oil change. We get the wipers changed. And when the yellow light comes on, we say, maybe I should get that checked out. And when the red light comes on, we say, I better get that checked out. And when we need the tow truck comes. We drive ourselves and our beings quite a bit, very long distances over very rough terrain. And I would offer, we don't always pull in to check the tires, to make sure that we get that regular oil change, to make sure that we can keep driving in a way that feels meaningful or healthy for us, in whatever that means for you, however you define that. And so I would offer having that person who you can check in with. Doesn't have to be all the time, but being able to know that when that yellow light goes on for you or the red light, that you have somewhere to pull in, to check in with someone who maybe isn't part of the facets, but can help you see from a wider angle. I heard someone recently say about an experience, about actually someone else's experience. It wasn't a physical threat, it was just fear. And I remember thinking to myself quietly, oh, fear is very real for our bodies and our beings. Giving ourselves a chance to check in with our resources, to check in with a supportive person who wants not a specific outcome, but wants us to be the best version of ourselves, can help us notice when our mind, body, and spirit need a little assistance and alignment, need an opportunity to say, I need to get these things out on the table. I used to work with a chaplain who would say, there's more room out here than there is in there, so let's get it out. Giving ourselves time, space, and opportunity to reflect, to engage, and to consider are powerful tools in how we navigate the landscape ahead, especially after diagnosis. My hope is that in this time together, you have become curious, perhaps about your own experience, perhaps about the experience of another, but something that might prompt you to consider engaging this topic a little bit more. And if not that, at least being a safe place for other people to engage you if they need to talk about their own experience of grief and loss. Because it is powerful, to be a listening ear for someone who is struggling. And how we show up matters. So I thank you for showing up today. I thank you for the time that you have given yourselves, that you have given me. I look forward to this time together. We're going to have about 10 minutes to talk, to share. And so if you find that those pieces of paper feel too weighty as you leave this room or at home, please know you have my full endorsement and support to rip them up. Because everything that I have shared, as I said, is by invitation and not obligation. And so I offer these things for your consideration. And you are welcome to take what you want of them and to leave the rest. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Gretchen. That was great. I think it was really helpful for people to know that they can sort of use they can ask people to sort of slow down. I'm not ready yet. I need to process and to get through things. I had a question that came in about, do you have any advice for when someone maybe finds out about your diagnosis and they're trying to connect by sort of comparing maybe something they've been through, what instead of maybe just listening? Is there what should somebody do? I mean, I know their heart is in the right place, but maybe they're just having a hard time to figure out how to make that connection.
Absolutely. I do try to start with the mindset for myself, at least, that the person means well, that their intention is good. And that helps me recenter myself in a place of grace, ideally, if not a little bit of patience. And to say, okay, I hear that you want to share this with me, and I might want to hear this in the future. I'm not ready yet. There's one thing about being on this other side of this veil that I talked about earlier, is that the rules don't necessarily apply. Our social structure rules that we live by and try to be gracious listeners and receive all that someone wants to offer us, sometimes we get to let some of those go, or we get to ease our grasp a little bit. Much like if you are the person in the gown, you don't have to necessarily be told what to do by all the people who get to go home at the end of the day. And so this is where I think it can be important to notice, right? And this is where the power of contemplation and reflection comes up. What am I noticing in myself? If I notice someone is trying to compare, my first question might be, how can I be curious? Are they looking to connect with me? Are they uncomfortable with what I'm about to say or what I'm going through? Or do I really just not want to hear it right now? And that's enough. And we can say, thank you for sharing. I'd rather not talk more about it at this time. And this is where I would offer that story crafting can be a really powerful part of this process. And there are a lot of wonderful storytelling and story crafting resources online and in community that can be powerful, because when we figure out what parts of the story we want to tell, it gives us a little bit of power in those moments to be able to say, oh, okay, this is the part of the story I was ready to share. This is not part of the story I want to share. And so we can allow the person to continue talking if that's comfortable for us, or we can interrupt and say, thank you, but no thank you right now.
Great. I have another question that just came in asking, how can you explain to doctors that you're sick, but they're just going by the numbers or the typical standards instead of what might be normal for you?
I think that is a really powerful question and awareness. And I think being able to know what's normal for us is an important part of the process, right? And so that's where that regular reflection, checking in with ourselves, knowing what we consider normal for ourselves. There's a word that gets used a lot in healthcare, baseline. And my question is always, help me know what the baseline was before. Because what I'm asking is, tell me how you define that word. And that can be an important question. We can ask our medical teams, when you are telling me these numbers, what does that look like? How do you understand that? What is the context? And this is where having community and connection can be helpful, because if someone is giving me, a medical person is giving me information, I may not remember it. And so I am counting on the person who is sitting next to me writing things down. And it's okay to say, I want you to come with me to write this down because I'm not going to remember any of it. And so those are important tools to us. And I think also, again, curiosity is one of those powerful tools. And being able to talk to our teams about, I'm curious what this looks like for you. I'm curious how you understand this. And that can put a lot of onus on us. And so it's okay for us not to do that. We continue to work with our teams all the time to try to help engage in that curiosity. So our team walks in with the idea of, how might this apply in this situation versus as a blanket for all situations?
Thanks.
Does that answer that question?
Yeah, Gretchen, and do you think, particularly for if we're working with your physician, that you may need to say something to them as well, right? About that curiosity, but to say, this is sort of what I feel is normal or has been normal for me. So that it's, maybe a little bit different for them compared to just what their typical information is that they're putting out.
Yes, and please know what I was saying, I think does apply to our physicians and our medical teams as well.
Yeah.
It is okay for us to talk with them as if they're human. It is okay. And I will offer that is something that I think a lot of us struggle with. I know that I will be sitting with a patient or a family, and the medical team will come in and they'll offer a lot of information, and they'll say, do you have any questions? And the family will say, nope. And then the medical team will leave, and there will be a plethora of questions. And I say, this is a time to write those down. These are great questions, and they are important to ask. And so if I know that I'm going to forget those things, then I am going to write those things down, or I'm going to ask someone else to write them down so that the next time I can talk with them about it. But it gives us a chance to notice, when the medical team walks in, is my body doing something different, right? Am I hearing, or am I holding my breath, or what's happening for me physically that's impacting how my brain is engaged online? And so that can be an important step in our own process. Or being able to say to the medical team, to the doctor, I'm going to need a moment to take a breath because I'm feeling nervous about what we're about to talk about. And that lets them know where you are. And now we're communicating. And now we're in community. And that can be a powerful way of improving our communication.
I think that's excellent information. I know from my own experience, writing those questions down, especially when they come up, maybe you're at home, that you're going to see the doctor, And you've got those now in front of you so that you don't forget, because I know time is precious, right? When you're working with your medical team, you want to make sure that you're able to get all those out. So my last question is, what about people who maybe minimize your experience? How do you handle that?
That is a great question. So that it's also a tough question. Give me a moment to think about it. There's my initial response, and then I want to offer you the more crafted version of that. There is a phrase that I didn't use in the presentation, but I'm going to use now. Sometimes, if we feel we have been given a faceted piece of dung, it is hard to sit with that, right? And someone else may want to tell us, well, that's not what that is. Let me tell you what it is, really. And my experience in listening to people talk for a very long time has been that a lot of that comes from their own fear of their own ability to attend to your emotions, or their emotions that come up when you're dealing with yours. And this is why, again, taking care of ourselves is so important, because it doesn't just impact how we experience things ourselves, but it impacts how we show up for others. And so I would offer that, again, when someone is minimizing what is a really big experience for us, it's okay to say, I hear what you're saying, and that's not my experience of it. This is, again, why I strongly recommend having an outside person to talk with, to be able to share, so that your big things can be your big things. The big emotions that come to us, regardless of what the situation is, they feel like big things. And it's okay. I mean, and let's be honest, many of us weren't taught or trained to practice that in a regular way. I think just in the last couple of years have we been seeing that kind of work in schools with children. So we're starting to teach coping skills, but a whole lot of us got through school without coping skills practice. And so the rest of us are navigating and doing the best we can. And so how do we then help ourselves have that space that we need to say, there are a lot of big feelings right now. You may not be the right person for me to talk about them with, and that's okay. Maybe we can reconnect later.
Thank you, Gretchen. That was amazing. I want to thank you so much for being here. I'm going to wrap up with our online audience. I'm going to turn it over to you for any questions they may have in person. So thank you again for joining us and sharing all of that information. I know that it's going to be very helpful for folks.
Well, thank you. And if you have any thoughts or feedback that you want to share with Maya and send to me, I'd be happy to receive it.
Thanks, Gretchen. Take care. Thanks for being here today. We look forward to having you back again next week. For our last in our survivorship series, it is cognitive healing and fatigue on Wednesday, October 29th at 2 p.m. If you're interested in this class, please give us a call. Our phone number is 520-324-1960. We'd be happy to get you registered. Our latest calendar for November just came out as well. So if you don't have a copy of the calendar, please give us a call. We'd be happy to email over a copy. In our first week in November, we do have Diabetes Day coming up on Wednesday, November 5th from 9:30 to noon. If that is something you're interested in, again, please give us a call, 520-324-1960. Thanks so much. We hope you have a great day.